I'm Jesse Ventura. Stay vigilant, question more. Welcome to my world. Come along for the ride. The world according to Jesse. Jen Briney, host of the Congressional Dish podcast, is back again with us here. This time she's here to discuss the Federal Reserve and why our monetary system is so complicated. Jen, thanks for coming back again. We always love to have you, and I want you to treat this today like you're talking to a grade school class of people, myself included. We need to understand, I think there's so much on the Federal Reserve that people just don't get. Now, Jen, for those who don't know, what is the Federal Reserve and why is it so hard for people to understand how it works?
Well, the Federal Reserve is officially the United States central bank, but in reality, it functions more as a cartel or a union of bankers that have control over the currency of the United States. And one of the reasons why it's so difficult for Americans to understand is that it was designed to be difficult to understand. It was created over 100 years ago in 1913 by a group of 6 very wealthy bankers. And they actually went and had a secret meeting off the coast of Georgia. And that's where they crafted the Federal Reserve legislation that became law. And so, there's so many ways in which this system is a trick right down to the name, because it's called the Federal Reserve, which makes most Americans think that it's 100% a part of our government. But the truth is that it's a weird, unique hybrid between government and private bankers. And so it was designed to be tricky. They don't want us to understand, because then we would understand that it's been a controversial idea for hundreds of years to even have a central bank. And if we understood that, then we might do something to stop it.
Well, I know a lot of our forefathers certainly did not want any central bank when they created the country. Now, how is money created and how do banks earn profits?
So money's created essentially with accounting gimmicks at this point. So for instance, one of the ways that the Federal Reserve creates money is that they take IOUs from the federal government and they return those IOUs for cash. And so essentially money is created out of nothing, because when you give someone an IOU, you're giving them nothing, and then the government gets cash in return. Another way that money is created is that banks are allowed to loan out more money than they actually have. So for instance, the big banks right now in this country only have to hold on to about 10% of our deposits, but they don't take 90% out of our bank accounts in order to lend that out to other people. Instead, what they do is they create new money and lend that. And so this entire system is built upon creating money out of nothing. And the way that the banks profit is that every time they create a new loan, they get interest on those loans. And the banks do get some money on top of that in fees for services, but it's the interest. The interest is the big game, because every single time they make a loan, they get money in return for making that loan in the form of interest, and it adds up to billions of dollars that go into shareholder pockets.
Now, Jen, who runs the Federal Reserve and how did they get the job?
Well, the short answer to that is bankers run the Federal Reserve. So there's 3 different levels of leadership in the Federal Reserve. So one level is the board of directors, and this is the section that's kind of government, because the board of directors are all appointed by the President of the United States, who is an official that's elected by the people, and then these people are then confirmed by the Senate. And so right now we're supposed to have 7 people on the board of directors. We only have 5, and 4 out of those 5 are investment bankers, including Jerome Powell, who is a filthy rich investment banker, and he's the chairman of the board. And so he is the most powerful person in the Federal Reserve. One step below that, we have 12 district banks, and this was the section that was used to sell this to the public, saying that these were going to represent the people. But the way that the board of directors of the district banks are selected, they're selected by bankers, businessmen, and by the board of directors, which, as we just established, are bankers. And so even the district banks are largely controlled by bankers. And then the third level is the Federal Open Markets Committee, which makes all of the policy decisions for our currency and for our monetary policy. And that is staffed by the Board of Governors, which, as we've already established, is a bunch of bankers, and the presidents of the 12 district banks. But the thing is, there's only one district bank that always gets to vote, and that's the New York District Bank, the president of the New York Bank, which is the bank that represents Wall Street. The other districts get to vote on a rotating basis. And so, and then the one thing about the Federal Open Market Committee that I think is the biggest scandal is that they get to make their decisions in secret. And so the public doesn't even get to know what their decisions are until after the fact.
Now, what is the gold standard and what happened when we got off it?
So once upon a time in this country, our money was connected to stuff that had actual intrinsic value, being metals, and gold in particular. Because gold can conduct electricity, gold can be used to fill cavities, and gold is obviously jewelry and is used in architecture all the time. So it has intrinsic value. And it used to be that you would get paper money, and that would be worth a certain amount in gold. Well, in the 1970s, breaking a promise that was made when the Federal Reserve was created, the gold standard was eliminated, and that meant that our money became pure fiat money, which is money that is based on nothing. You can't bring the Federal Reserve notes anywhere and get any kind of metal in return. And so now that our money is pure fiat money, it's able to be manipulated by those that are in charge. And right now, that's the Federal Reserve.
Now, are there any checks and balances on the Fed?
Well, technically, yeah, but no, because there's no way for the People's Branch of Government, Congress, to impeach anyone in the Federal Reserve. So the Board of Governors, they can't be removed by our representatives. And even the president, there is a line that says that the president can remove the Board of Governors for cause, but this has never actually been tested, so we don't actually know if that's possible. And what's actually worse than that is that we have trusted the Federal Reserve to regulate the banks. And so not only are they not really accountable to the people, but they're policing the bankers. And considering it's staffed by bankers, we're allowing the bankers to police themselves.
Wow. How does our banking system benefit Congress?
Well, so this goes a long way to explaining how Congress is able to do so many things without paying for it, because this system allows Congress to have money printed by the Federal Reserve and not have to go directly to the people and tax us for things like unnecessary wars and bailouts and things like that. And so Congress benefits from this money conjuring because they get to play Santa Claus without actually having to go to the people. Now, we do pay for this. We pay for this in a hidden tax called inflation. Because as you expand the money supply, the money that's in your bank account, the value of that goes down. You can't purchase as much as you would have if the value of your money goes down. So we do pay, but it's in a much sneakier way that most Americans don't understand. And so that's how the politicians benefit. They can promise the world and launch all kinds of wars without paying for it. But again, it's the American people that suffer. We just don't seem to be aware of it.
Well, Jen, this sounds to me like some real shady business, the Federal Reserve. But anyway, talk about the connections between the Federal Reserve and foreign banks. Is there an economic system of debt forced upon the entire world because of this situation?
Well, yeah, because the Federal Reserve is just one of many central banks. And in fact, there are central banks for the central banks now on the international scale. And when you think about foreign versus domestic banks, there's a lot of banks now that are just multinational. They're stateless. They're not really foreign or domestic. And a lot of those banks were bailed out by the Federal Reserve after their own recklessness tanked the world economy in 2008. And this went on for over a decade. In fact, it still goes on now. And so all of these banking systems are interconnected, and a lot of what we do on an international scale is we are forcing other countries to change their economic laws so that they also have central banks and so that they also use fiat currencies. And so because it's so interconnected, I think the answer is yes, there is a system of debt being forced upon the world because we want everyone, or we don't want it, but those that are in power that get to manipulate the money supply, they want this to be global. And with the multinational banks, they're well on their way to getting there. I wish I had better news for you.
Well, I'll tell you, in listening today, it sounds like this was set up to be corrupt. I mean, they've left themselves so many openings for pure corruption. That's what I see out of this whole thing. Unfortunately, we're out of time, Jen. I want to thank you again for coming on the show. We'll have you back because you're a fountain of information. I love it. Thank you, and thank you for your vigilance. Keep up the great work.
Thanks for having me.
The world